History can sometimes be scary, but it's something that we must learn from no matter how horrible it is. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. I'm your host Emily, and today we are counting down our list of the top 10 dark historical facts you won't believe are actually real. Number 10. Carbon dioxide went down due to so many deaths. Genghis Khan was a founder and first Khagan of the Mongol Empire, which later became the largest adjoining land empire in history. Having spent the majority of his life uniting the Mongol tribes, he launched a series of military campaigns which conquered large parts of China and Central Asia. In the 13th century, he ended the lives of so many peasants that the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were significantly reduced as a result. During his 21-year reign, his destructive armies were responsible for the deaths of up to 40 million people. With so many people gone and nobody left to farm the lands owned by the peasants, nature went back to its true form and grew back into carbon-absorbing forests. It's estimated that 700 tons of carbon were wiped from the atmosphere, which, to put in perspective, is around the same amount of carbon dioxide generated in a year through global gasoline consumption. Now, before we continue on, I have a question for all of you watching. Do you ever get tired of those same old boring games from the App Store? Well, look no further, because I have just the game for you. It's called Raid Shadow Legends, and it's honestly the best. It's completely free to download, and there's already millions of users. It has amazing graphics, and there's billions of ways to customize and build your champions, as there's endless content. Now, I'm sure you've all heard the hypothetical question, which 4 historical people would you invite to a dinner party? Well, if I could choose 4 characters from Raid to have dinner with, I'd choose Aethel, Sniper, Archer, and Fireblade. They are 4 strong female characters who are tough, and I'd love to get some battle tips from them. Plus, they have awesome names. And if Sniper could teach me how to use her bow and arrow, that would be pretty cool in my opinion. Who would you bring? Let me know in the comments down below. But that's not all. Raid's 4th anniversary is here, and there's a ton to get excited about. I'm talking dedicated offers, gifts, promo codes, events, and a brand new fusion event where you guys can get your hands on the anniversary themed legendary champion. But wait, there's more. With all this exciting stuff and more coming to Raid, if you haven't started playing yet, then what are you waiting for? For new users only, you can use our link in the description or scan our QR code to get insane bonuses. We're talking an epic champion Kellen the Strike and other useful things. And since it's Raid's birthday, the gifts keep coming. All new and existing players can get a bunch of free birthday gifts. Once you're in game after clicking the links, just enter promo code 4YearsRaid to get your hands on 4 legendary skill tomes plus other useful stuff. Simple. So make sure to download Raid Shadow Legends, and let's get on with the video. Number 9. Dentures were made from the dead. Dentures were a pretty big deal among the upper classes in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Typically high sugar diets combined with early attempts at teeth whitening, which wore away tooth enamel instead of brightening it, meant that their teeth were bad. So people would get dentures. But how did they make dentures back then? The easiest and most profitable way to acquire human teeth for dentures was to take them from the dead. Yup, they would take dead people's teeth and use them as their own teeth. The battlefield at Waterloo presented thousands of recently dead soldiers whose teeth were unfortunately perfect for taking. I mean, reduce, reuse, recycle, right? But I think I'd rather have no teeth than have dentures made of someone else's teeth. Number 8. Human zoos. Yes, you heard that right. There were zoos, and instead of animals, which some people are already against, they were filled with people. Like human beings of all genders and ages. Human zoos were public displays of people, usually in so-called natural or primitive state. They were most prominent during the 19th and 20th centuries, and in the 1870s, exhibitions of so-called exotic populations became popular throughout the Western world. Human zoos could be seen in many of Europe's largest cities, such as Paris, Hamburg, London, Milan, as well as American cities such as New York City and Chicago. They began as part of circuses and freak shows, and in the Western Hemisphere, one of the earliest known zoos, that in Mexico, consisted not only of a vast collection of animals, but also dwarves, albinos, and hunchbacks. This wasn't all though, as the dissection and display of bodies after their death without consent was also shown. Throughout their existence, such exhibitions garnered controversy over their demeaning, derogatory, and dehumanizing nature. Thankfully, the last human zoo on record was at the World's Fair in Brussels in 1958, which isn't even that long ago, which is insane to me. Number 7. Magdalene asylums. I hope I'm saying that right. Magdalene asylums, also known as Magdalene laundries, were Roman Catholic institutions that operated from the 18th to the late 20th centuries to house fallen women. The term referred to female sexual promiscuity or work in prostitution, young women who became pregnant outside of marriage, or young girls and teenagers who did not have familial support. They were required to work without pay apart from food provisions. Many of these laundries were effectively operated as penitentiary workhouses. The strict regimes in the institutions were often more severe than those found in prisons. Now, this contradicted the perceived outlook that they were meant to help women as opposed to punishing them, but let's be honest, they were just punishing them. These places operated in the United Kingdom, Ireland, Sweden, Canada, and the United States and Australia for much of the 19th and well into the 20th century, with the last one closing in 1996, which isn't that long ago. A survivor said of the working conditions, "The heat was unbelievable, you couldn't leave your station unless a bell went." Now that definitely sounds more like a punishment, and I don't understand how this could happen. Number 6. The Schoolhouse Blizzard. The Schoolhouse Blizzard hit the US Plains states on January 12, 1888. The blizzard came unexpectedly on a relatively warm day, and most people were not dressed properly. Many people went out without coats and even short-sleeved shirts. What made the storm so deadly was the timing, as it was during work and school hours. The very strong wind fields behind the cold front and the powdery snow reduced visibilities on the open plains to zero, which is terrifying. People ventured from the safety of their homes to do chores, go to town, attend school, or simply enjoy the warm day. The weather changed so fast though, and people weren't prepared for it, and as a result, thousands of people got caught in the blizzard. They got lost in the darkness and the snow and the wind, and many froze in their town, just yards away from houses or other sources of refuge. The death toll was 235, though some estimate 1,000. Now, I know I complain about Canadian winter and snowstorms, but this is definitely worse. Number 5. Human remains in medicine. Human remains were a common ingredient in medicine until the 20th century, which again is disgusting to me. The remains were most commonly ground up into fine powder that could be made into pills or stirred into drinks. People thought that ingesting a certain part of the body would help cure illnesses in that part of their own. For example, crushed skull powder was believed to cure headaches. Now, I am so glad that our science has advanced past that, because I cannot imagine ingesting something from another human. Now, due to this, mummy remains were particularly valued as remedies. In fact, there are so few mummies these days precisely because of this high demand for human flesh at the time. Ew. Number 4. The AIDS epidemic. The AIDS epidemic caused by HIV found its way to the United States between the 1970s and 1980s. During the HIV/AIDS epidemic of the 1880s, LGBTQ communities were further stigmatized as they became the focus of mass hysteria, suffered isolation and marginalization, and were targeted with extreme acts of violence in the United States. One of the best known works on the history of HIV and AIDS is the 1987 book And the Band Played On by Randy Schultz, who claimed that Ronald Reagan's administration dragged its feet in dealing with the crisis due to homophobia, while the gay community viewed early reports and public health measures with corresponding distrust, thus allowing the disease to spread further and infect hundreds of thousands more. US leaders had remained largely silent and unresponsive to the health emergency, and it wasn't until September 1985, 4 years after the crisis began, that President Ronald Reagan first publicly mentioned AIDS. If Reagan took steps 4 years earlier to help and wasn't so homophobic, many lives would have been saved, but he ignored it. As of 2018, 700,000 people have died of HIV/AIDS in the United States since the beginning of the epidemic, and nearly 13,000 people with AIDS in the United States die each year. Number 3. Residential schools. Now, many people think that Canada is all sunshine and rainbows, but we actually have our own dark past. In Canada, the Indian residential residential school system was a network of boarding schools for Indigenous peoples. The network was funded by the Canadian government's Department of Indian Affairs and administered by Christian churches. The school system was created to isolate Indigenous children from the influence of their own culture and religion in order to assimilate them into the dominant Canadian culture. Over the course of the system's more than 100 years existence, around 150,000 children were placed in residential schools nationally. The residential school system harmed Indigenous children significantly by removing them from their families, depriving them of their ancestral languages, and mistreating them both physically and mentally. Conditions in the schools led to student malnutrition, starvation, and disease. The legacy of the system has been linked to an increased prevalence of post-traumatic stress, alcoholism, use of illegal substances, and generational trauma in Indigenous peoples. The number of school-related deaths remains unknown due to incomplete records, but estimates range from 3,000 to 200 to over 30,000, and there are thousands of unmarked graves of the poor students. Number 2. Mountain Peele. In the late 1890s and early 1900s, St. Pierre, Martinique was known as a beautiful town, but there was darkness looming over it, a volcano. Citizens of the area were so used to the volcanic activity that no one took it seriously when the fresh steaming vent holes and earth tremors started during April 1902. Then minor explosions began at the summit of the volcano, ash began to rain down continuously, and the nauseating stench of sulfur filled the air. Even worse, more than 100 snakes slithered down and invaded the town. Yeah, snakes. And they ended the lives of 50 people. Then on May 5th, a landslide of boiling mud and water from the Etang Sec crater lake spilled into the River Blanche and 23 workmen died. This was followed by a tsunami that ended the lives of hundreds of people. This naturally caused concern in the town and many wanted to leave. I'm sorry, but people stayed through all of that and decided to stay, even after the whole snake situation. Then 3 days later, May 8th, Mount Peele finally exploded, sending an avalanche of white-hot lava straight towards the town. Within 3 minutes, St. Pierre was completely destroyed, and of its 30,000 population, there were only 2 people who survived. And coming in at number 1 is the dancing plague. In 1518, the city of Strasbourg was hit by a dancing plague where people would dance uncontrollably for days at a time. It began with a single woman dancing solo for a few days, before eventually more and more people became affected. Doctors proclaimed that the illness was caused by overheated blood and recommended that the inflicted should continue to shimmy and sway the fever away. I mean, musicians were even called in and a stage was set up in the town center to give the dancers more room. While the idea may seem funny at first, most of them kept dancing till they fell unconscious, and some died from exhaustion, heart attack, or stroke. Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 dark historical facts you won't believe are actually real. Which one shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments down below, and hey, why not like and subscribe while you're down there? I'm your host Emily, and I'll see you next time. Peace.